Victor Dalmeda, owner of one of the largest financial conglomerates in the country, was a man marked by his pain. Years earlier, he had lost his wife, Helena, during the birth of their daughter, Alice. Helena was his love, his companion, and the anchor that kept him human amidst the rigidity of his professional life. Her death left such a void that Victor, unable to cope with the grief, sought someone to blame. And that scapegoat, unjustly, was Alice. A few years passed and Alice was now only 6 years old, a little girl with bright eyes and a shy smile. But to Victor, every time he looked at her, all he could see was Helena's absence. He never said it aloud, but the silence and coldness with which he treated her spoke louder than any words. She grew up surrounded by luxury but without the basic love a child needs. Victor immersed himself in his work, spending most of his time in meetings and business trips. His behavior became increasingly arrogant, his patience thinner. He treated those around him as disposable, including Clara, the housekeeper who took care of the home and, most importantly, Alice. Clara had been hired shortly after Helena's death. Victor had barely paid attention to her at the beginning, delegating the hiring responsibility to the house manager. Clara was a 35-year-old woman with gentle features and a warm smile, but her eyes revealed the experience of someone who had faced many challenges. She was a single mother to Lucas, an 8-year-old boy. Despite her dual role as a housekeeper and mother, Clara always gave her best. When she entered Victor's house, she found a frightened and lonely child. Alice hid in corners, avoided contact, and seemed to carry a burden far heavier than her young age should bear. With patience and tenderness, Clara began to earn Alice's trust. Little by little, Alice started to hold her hand and smile at her, finding a safe harbor. Clara filled the void left by Victor, offering the affection the girl desperately needed. But every time Clara tried to bring Alice closer to her father, she was met with an icy wall. Clara speaks, "Mr. Victor, Alice misses you. Maybe you could have dinner with her tonight," she suggested one day, while Victor was reviewing documents in his office. He barely looked up. "I'm busy, Clara. She doesn't need me." "She has you, doesn't she?" Clara bit her lip, holding back what she wanted to say. She knew Victor was broken inside, but his coldness left no room for explanations. As Victor pulled away, Clara grew closer. She was the one who listened to Alice's fears, comforted her when she cried, and sat by her bed at night to read stories. Even though she had a son of her own, Lucas, Clara spent more time caring for Alice than him. Lucas, who spent his days at school, only saw his mother at night when she picked him up to take him home. "Mom, why do you care so much about Alice?" Lucas asked once, with a mix of curiosity and resentment. Clara hugged him and replied, "Because she doesn't have anyone to care for her like you have me." "But you are my heart, Lucas. Never forget that." Lucas understood but still wished for more time with his mother. Clara, however, did her best to balance both worlds. She knew she was exhausted but believed her role in Alice's life was too important to neglect. Victor rarely spoke to Clara beyond what was necessary. When he did, it was to give orders or correct something he thought wasn't up to his standards. One afternoon, after finding Alice playing in the garden with Clara, he called her to his office. "Clara, I think you're spending too much time with my daughter. Your job is to take care of the house, not play in the garden," he said coldly. Clara stood firm and replied, "Mr. Victor, Alice doesn't just need clean clothes and prepared meals, she needs love. And, with all due respect, that should come from you." Victor frowned, his voice turning even harsher. "Don't tell me how to raise my daughter. Do your job and leave the rest to me." Clara left the office with a lump in her throat. She knew Victor wasn't a bad man, but someone crushed by the weight of his grief. Even so, she couldn't ignore the impact his coldness was having on Alice. Looking at the little girl playing alone in the garden, Clara promised herself that as long as she could, she would stand by her. Little did Clara know, the time she had to fulfill that promise was shorter than she imagined. It was an apparently ordinary day at Victor's mansion. Clara was in the kitchen, preparing Alice's lunch with her usual care. There was something special about the way she chopped vegetables or stirred the soup. Every gesture seemed imbued with love, as though she was trying to pour all the affection she felt for the little girl into every dish she served. Alice, as usual, sat at the table, coloring pictures while chatting with Clara. "Aunt Clara, do you think my drawing is pretty?" Alice asked, proudly showing off a sheet full of colors. Clara smiled, leaning down to take a closer look. "It's beautiful, my princess. I think you're going to be a great artist when you grow up." Alice smiled back, but their tranquil moment was interrupted by Victor's arrival. He entered the kitchen with firm steps, carrying some papers in his hand. His face bore his usual impatient expression, and his eyes immediately fell on Clara. "Victor speaks. Clara, can you explain what this is?" he asked, holding up one of the papers. Clara frowned, confused. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir." Victor threw the paper onto the counter. It was the week's shopping list, marked with small handwritten adjustments Clara had made. She had included a few extra items for a dinner Alice had requested. "Are you trying to decide for me what comes into my house?" "Who gave you that authority?" Victor demanded, his tone sharp as a blade. Clara, surprised, tried to explain. "Sir, I just wanted to prepare something special for Alice. She asked for a few things, and I thought it would be good for her." Victor interrupted, his voice rising. "You're not here to decide what's good for my daughter. You're here to follow orders. Just do as you're told and don't meddle." Alice, who had been listening to everything, lowered her head, gripping her pencil tightly. Clara looked at the girl, her heart aching. She tried to hold herself back, but Victor's words had crossed a line. "Clara speaks. Mr. Victor, with all due respect, I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing it for Alice because she deserves it. If I care about what she eats or how she feels, it's because someone needs to care." Victor frowned, his face hardening further. "You're forgetting your place, Clara. I'm not interested in your opinions. Now get back to work." Clara remained silent, but something inside her had broken. For years, she had endured Victor's disdain, believing she could bear anything for Alice's sake. But in that moment, she realized she was sacrificing not just her dignity but also her time with Lucas, her son. The pain of spending her days away from him weighed on her heart more than ever. That day, Clara continued her work, but she had made an irrevocable decision. When her tasks were done, she sat at the kitchen table, took a piece of paper, and began writing a letter. Every word was a piece of her soul, an outpouring she had held back for years. When she finished, Clara folded the letter carefully and left it on Victor's desk in his office. Then, she went up to Alice's room, where the little girl was sound asleep. Clara sat beside her, gently stroking her soft hair. "My little one, Aunt Clara has to go now, but never forget how much I love you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Afterward, Clara packed her things, removed her uniform for the last time, and walked out the front door. As she left the mansion, she felt a mix of sadness and relief. It was the end of a chapter. The following morning, Victor descended the stairs of the mansion, already immersed in his thoughts. The house was unusually silent, but he was so accustomed to Clara's quiet presence that he barely noticed her absence. He went to his office to begin his day by reviewing documents before heading to his meetings. That's when he saw the envelope on his desk, his name written on it in careful letters. Victor picked up the envelope with curiosity. Clara had never left messages before. He opened it and began to read, his expression initially neutral. But as he progressed through the paragraphs, his eyes began to narrow. At first, he thought it was a standard resignation letter, something he had received from other employees before. But then the words began to penetrate his emotional armor. Clara's letter. "Alice is an extraordinary little girl, full of light and love. It was a privilege to care for her, even during the most challenging times. I love that girl as if she were my own, but it's time for me to prioritize someone who also needs me, my son, Lucas." Victor paused, frowning. He had never really thought about Clara's son, Lucas. He knew she was a single mother but had never cared to ask how she balanced work and motherhood. A pang of discomfort began to grow in his chest, but he continued reading. "I recently discovered that my health is compromised. I don't have much time left, Mr. Victor. That's why I'm leaving. I want to spend my remaining days with Lucas, giving him what I couldn't during these years, my presence, my love, and my dedication." Victor's hands trembled, and he had to sit down. My health is compromised. Those words echoed in his mind like thunder. Clara, the woman he had viewed as a constant, who never complained and always did more than was asked, was dying. He reread the phrase, hoping he had misunderstood, but there was no mistake. Victor placed his hand on his face, feeling a tightness in his chest that he couldn't identify. He continued reading, but now each word felt like a blow. I hope you take care of Alice as she deserves. She needs a father who loves her, who values her, and who sees in her the joy that still exists despite everything. Don't waste any more time, because it's more precious than you realize. When he finished reading, Victor left the letter on the desk but kept staring into space. For the first time in years, he felt completely vulnerable. The reality of his actions or inactions hit him like a tidal wave. He thought of Clara, of all the times he had treated her with indifference, ignoring her effort and dedication. He thought of Alice, of the sadness he had inflicted on her with his coldness. Victor looked at Helena's photo on the shelf. He had always used her memory as a justification for his behavior, for the emptiness he had cultivated within himself. But now he realized that his pain had never given him the right to hurt others. He had neglected Alice, pushed away the one person who had always been there for his daughter, and now, there was no time left to make it right with Clara. Victor suddenly stood up, gripped by a sense of urgency he couldn't explain. He needed to find Clara. He needed to tell her what he had never said before, that he respected her, that he was sorry, that he had been wrong. He climbed the stairs to Alice's room. The girl was sitting on her bed, clutching one of the drawings she had made for Clara. "Daddy, did Aunt Clara leave?" she asked, her voice trembling. Victor swallowed hard, feeling a lump in his throat. "Yes, sweetheart. She left." Alice lowered her head, holding the drawing tightly against her chest. "She told me last night that she loved me, but I don't know why she had to go." Victor approached slowly and knelt in front of his daughter, something he had never done before. He placed his hands on her shoulders, trying to find the right words. "I don't know either. But we're going to find out." The girl looked at him, surprised by his gentler tone. For the first time, she saw something different in her father's face. There was no coldness, but a glimpse of humanity. Victor got into his car and drove to Clara's address, which he had noted in the house's records. During the drive, his mind was flooded with memories. He recalled all the times he had ignored her, all the times he had treated her as if she were just another cog in the machinery of his life. Now, he realized he had lost more than an employee. He had lost someone who was essential to his daughter and, in a way, to himself as well. When he arrived at the modest building where Clara lived, he was met by a neighbor standing at the entrance. She looked at him with a sympathetic gaze, recognizing him from Clara's descriptions. "You must be Mr. Victor," the woman said in a soft tone. "It's too late." Victor felt the ground shift beneath him. "What do you mean, too late for what?" The neighbor lowered her head. "Clara passed away last night. She was at home with her son, Lucas. It was quick, but she was at peace. She was with him." For a moment, Victor couldn't say anything. He just stood there, feeling the weight of the woman's words. Clara was gone. He hadn't had the chance to apologize, to make amends, to tell her how much she mattered. Victor glanced up at the building and saw Lucas sitting by the window, staring out with sad eyes. He looked so small, so lost. Clara had written about him in her letter with so much love and guilt for not being there for him as much as she wanted. And now, he was alone. Victor felt his chest tighten. He nodded silently and climbed the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though he was carrying the weight of all the choices that had brought him there. When he reached the door, he found it slightly ajar. He entered slowly, calling the boy's name hesitantly. "Lucas." "My name is Victor. I worked with your mom." Lucas appeared in the hallway, holding a small toy car in his hands. His eyes were red, but his expression was firm, as if he was trying to be brave. "My mom isn't here. She told me she was going to rest and that I needed to be strong." "Aunt Sarah said she's gone forever," he said plainly. Though his voice carried a sadness Victor recognized immediately, it was the same sadness he had felt when Helena died. Victor knelt down, trying to be at the boy's eye level. I know this is very hard. Your mom was an amazing woman. She talked about you a lot. She said you were everything to her." Lucas looked at Victor curiously, as though trying to decide if he could trust this stranger. After a moment, he replied, "I tried to be the best son for her. I always made my bed and did my homework. I think that made her happy. Victor felt tears welling up in his eyes but held them back. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, trying to offer what Clara had asked for in her letter, love and care. She was very proud of you, Lucas. And now, I want to help. I want to make sure you have everything you need, just like your mom wanted. Clara was laid to rest in a somber but heartfelt ceremony. There was a sense of peace in the air, as though she had fulfilled her purpose and departed content. In the days that followed, Victor took swift action to ensure Lucas wouldn't be left without support. He handled the necessary paperwork to gain temporary custody of the boy and hired a lawyer to begin the adoption process. For the first time in a long while, Victor used his resources and connections not to expand his business but to rectify a personal wrong. Lucas moved into the mansion. At first, he seemed uncomfortable in the unfamiliar and cold environment. However, Alice was visibly excited to meet him. On his first day, she approached him in the garden, holding one of her drawings. "Do you like drawing?" she asked, shy but curious. Lucas shrugged. "I like toy cars. Sometimes I draw them." Alice smiled. "I can show you how I draw. Maybe you can teach me about cars." The two began playing together, and Victor watched the scene from a distance. For the first time, he felt something different, a sense of hope. Alice, who had once seemed so isolated, now had a companion. And Lucas, though still mourning, was beginning to find some comfort. That evening, Victor sat in his office with Clara's letter in his hands. He read it again, but this time with a different perspective. He realized how blind he had been not only to Clara's sacrifices but also to the love she gave without expecting anything in return. He remembered her words, Clara's letter, "I hope you take care of Alice as she deserves. She needs a father who loves her, who values her, and who sees in her the joy that still exists despite everything. Don't waste any more time, because it's more precious than you realize." Victor placed the letter on the desk and looked at Helena's photo. For the first time, he spoke aloud. "I was wrong, Helena. But I'll make this right, for you, for Alice. And for Clara." Victor began to change. He devoted all his time to being with Alice and Lucas, trying to build the connection he had never had before. On weekends, he took the children to the park, taught Lucas how to ride a bike, and read stories to Alice before bed. The rigidity that once defined him began to fade. One sunny afternoon, as Alice and Lucas played in the garden, Victor realized how much his life had changed. The children's laughter filled the mansion with a warmth he hadn't felt since Helena was alive. He smiled, finally understanding what Clara meant about time and love. It wasn't too late to become the man he should have been. And so, this story teaches us that we must forgive those we love. We shouldn't wait to embrace them, to tell them how much they mean to us, and to show them our love. Time is relentless, and one day, it might be too late. Cherish today to love, forgive, and value those by your side.